7. Now, here's Jordy.
Welcome back to Maritime Morning. I'm Jordy Morgan, and you may or may not have heard this story coming out of Ottawa. There's a Senate committee that decided it would be a good idea to have a seal cull. They're making that recommendation anyway. They're endorsing this. It's been a little bit contentious. The Gulf of St. Lawrence is the area they're talking about, and they're thinking of doing it over a 4-year period, and they say that 70,000 gray seals should be culled from the herd. It is the Senate Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. They started hearings last year. It was in response to Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat call for an experimental and, it's an unprecedented cull of gray seals. So the idea is that, from the Senate Committee's point of view anyway, that they need more information about what the impact of a seal cull would be, and rather than speculating on it, go out there and do it, and then see what the results are. Well, there are, I suppose it's not hard to imagine people that are not in agreement with a seal cull, and among them is Bridget Curran. Bridget is with the Atlantic Anti-Sealing Coalition, and she joins me on the phone this morning. Good morning, Bridget Curran.
Good morning, Jordy. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thanks.
This report recommends a couple of things. There's 70,000, I think, gray seals being culled. There is also a bounty system being put in place to compensate hunters. Presumably they don't know much about the markets and whatnot, so I guess there's some market driven stuff that's probably going to go along with this. What are your thoughts on the I presume that you are in disagreement with it, but what are your thoughts on the idea of a cull from a scientific point of view?
Well, I'm not surprised by the Senate Committee's report. The Senate Committee's report recommending such a large scale of cull of gray seals makes it glaringly obvious that seal management in Atlantic Canada is based on politics rather than science. Now, the committee heard from an array of independent scientists, all who spoke strongly against the cull. Leading marine biologists told the committee the proposal was scientifically insupportable and warned that the cull could actually have unexpected negative impacts on the recovery of groundfish stocks. Alternatively, the committee heard from a group of sealers who admitted gray seals were not their area of expertise and instead talked about harp seals, which is a completely different species of seals and not the target of this proposed cull. Now, ultimately, the committee rejected the evidence of leading scientific experts and agreed with the sailors that gray seals eat too many fish and so must die in case fish stocks will come back with less seals in the water. Now, as I said, this makes it glaringly obvious that this decision, this recommendation, is rooted in politics and not science. You can't get more evidence than that the impetus behind this recommendation is politics. It's a vote grab, and it's a make-work project for disgruntled sealers. They're disgruntled with the collapse of seal product markets. And as per usual, Canadian taxpayers will be footing the bill, which it's been speculated could cost upwards to $35 million.
Well, I'm trying to kind of get my head wrapped around this in terms of the politics. For one, there perhaps, and I presume that it's coming from, I don't know about disgruntled sealers, but perhaps the fishing industry is actually applying some pressure to the Minister of Fisheries on here. But this was coming out of the Senate, and yes, I understand that there are Tories and Liberals and everything else that are running around in the Senate. But I mean, what gain is there in doing this cull if there isn't some scientific advantage to actually acquiring the data?
Well, fishermen have been lobbying the government for many years now to have a large-scale cull of gray seals or a commercial market if such markets existed, which they don't. In 2006, there was talk about drowning seals off Sable Island in nets and traps, which is actually condemned by the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association. Likewise, there had been talk about shooting seals in open water, which again is condemned. I do believe that this is a vote grab. I think fishermen and sailors are really the only people right now that are making seal management in Atlantic Canada a voting issue, and governments throughout the years have been relying on the Atlantic swing vote for that. Now, the government is caught in a really hard place because they need to be seen to be doing something about seals, which means disregarding the overwhelming scientific evidence that the culling of gray seals is scientifically insupportable. So it is a vote grab, and the government is placating the fishing and sealing lobbyists to get their votes.
What science is available out there now? Because I know that there were some folks from Dalhousie University that said that there could be some unexpected consequences to all of this, that that it's not necessarily a zero-sum game, that, less seals mean more fish.
Mm-hmm. And that's the problem with Department of Fisheries notions. Over the years, they've gone on the supposition that less seals will mean more fish. And they've always looked at the management of our oceans in a very simplistic one species versus another species, when actually it's a complex web of ecosystem that should really be looked into. And the scientists were basically saying to the Senate committee that there are many positive impacts on the ecosystem by gray seals. And that's a huge problem, is that too much focus has been given to possible negative impact of gray seal predation, while the positive impacts have been ignored totally. And one of the positive impacts, of course, is seals eat a large amount of forage fish, which actually prey on the cod. So if you're removing a large number of top predators in our oceans, of course, then you're going to end up with more forage fish and more predation of cod and less cod. So the notion that less seals equals more cod is not scientifically supportable. Now, the government has been trying for many years to find evidence that gray seal predation has negatively impacted groundfish stocks, and they just can't find that evidence. They've never been able to prove it. And to suggest that we take such an irresponsible action as removing a large number of top predators in our oceans just to see what happens is absolutely insane. And it's something that Canadians should be standing up and saying, no way, you've mismanaged our oceans enough. It's time to stop and look at this scientifically rather than politically.
Is there any science that is backing up this idea? I mean, and I'm not asking you to advocate for it, but I mean, was there any science that was presented in front of the committee that said, look, this is something that is a reasoned approach?
No, there's never been any credible science to suggest that this is a reasoned approach. And in fact, there is evidence to the contrary. Such seal culls have been conducted in other countries throughout the world, and the results have been either there's been no impact or an unknown impact. So there's never been any evidence that culling large amounts of gray seals will actually benefit groundfish stocks, and scientists are saying that in fact it may negatively impact them.
Well, then I'm trying to figure out, how did they come to the number? I mean, why is it that they're looking at 70,000 versus 20,000 versus, I don't know, 5,000, whatever it is? Why is it that they've decided on the number of 70,000? Because as I understand it, harp seals are the ones that really have, if there was any market for seal pelts and that kind of stuff, that would be it. Secondarily, if they're going, as you said, if they're going to pull all of these numbers out, why would they not do it, for example, in a smaller area, just to determine whether or not there would be some impact in a smaller area before going to a wider scale cull?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure how they ended up with the 70,000 figure. I know a few different figures had been suggested by DFO, and they base those on models which are, I don't know, kind of fast and loose at times. So I'm not quite sure about the 70,000 figure.
Isn't it? PEI Senator Elizabeth Hughley, who's the deputy chair of the committee, made an interesting comment saying the committee understands that recommending a targeted removal carries ecological, political, and economic risks, but we believe that it's the best course of action.
Yes, it's interesting that the committee itself in its report admits that there could be unexpected negative consequences, and also the committee admitted in the report it recognized that human overfishing has been a major cause of the collapse of groundfish stocks. And I found that very interesting that they recognized that in the report. And another thing that I think they realize is that fish stocks in the area have never been given a chance to recover. Years of mismanagement by DFO has just prevented their recovery. They've closed the Gulf to fishing, and then they've reopened it too soon with an unsustainable quota, and then they closed it again when fish stocks collapsed again. And they did this over and over and over again. There's a timeline of their mismanagement of the ground fish stocks. So to blame seals on this is absolutely ludicrous. And again, it's entirely unscientific.
It's an interesting debate. It's puzzling, to say the least, but certainly I'd be interested in hearing from the other side of this anyway, because what I find unusual is that when actions like this are taken, there is generally either a scientific or a more pronounced rationale for doing it, as opposed to simply saying, let's just do it and see what happens. It does seem a little strange.
Well, I'd like to leave you with the words of Dr. Jeffrey Hutchings from Dalhousie University. Now, he said from a science perspective, science is reaching the limits of what it can confidently predict would result from a cull of gray seals. He says ultimately the decision whether or not to do it will not be a science one, but will have to be based on something else. Now, clearly the Senate committee's decision to recommend this large scale of gray seals was based on something else, and that something else was political expediency.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll have to take that as an assumption at this point anyway, until we determine something otherwise. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time talking to us this morning.
Thank you, Jordy. Have a great day.
Good. That's Bridget Curran. She is with the Atlantic Anti-Sealing Coalition. I'd like to hear if you think that this is a reasoned idea, or if you have concerns about this as well. In terms of a seal hunt, I've generally supported the idea of it, but the notion that you are going to go and remove 70,000 animals from 100,000 herd, okay, so you're essentially looking at a reduction of about 70%, and you're doing it to see what would happen, to me does not appear to be sound reasoning. Now, maybe there is other reasoning behind this. Fishermen out there are saying, well, it's because there are too many fish or too many seals out there and they're eating the fish, and that's the reason for the depletion of the stocks. But one would also think that in a natural, balanced environment that, if there was not enough fish to feed a specific herd, then the herd would naturally die off. So it seems like a strange piece of policy coming out of the Senate anyway. And just interested if do you support the seal hunt? Do you think that it's something that we should be doing anyway, or does this announcement actually puzzle you? 405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255 is our number. That's 405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. Your thoughts on this after we take a break on Maritime Morning.